Good morning and welcome to this edition of For the Record. Today we're discussing the importance of early intervention to help children have safe and loving homes. Today's guest is Bud Lavery. He is the president and CEO of Prevent Child Abuse North Carolina. We're so happy to have him come on the program to talk about his wonderful work here at this organization. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Eric.
Now tell us about your background. How did you get involved in this type of work?
It comes out of my personal experiences in reality in terms of both my own family and what I saw around me. So on the one hand, for most of my life, I grew up in a nice suburb, kind of the American dream, at least that's what it's billed to be. And I had a lot of friends who really struggled. A number of them were trying drugs. There was a lot of pain behind those very pretty lawns and pretty painted faces or painted houses. What I also saw, though, is on another front, is sometimes I saw poverty, like in the city that was next to us, and saw the injustice. It's like, we have so much, and these folks, it was actually someone who was homeless who was begging for money, and we were going out for dinner one night. I was like, Dad, as a little kid, I was like, Dad, you've got to give him money. He's like, no, and I didn't understand why. And in a lot of ways, it led to a lifelong quest of why do some kids succeed and why do some kids struggle? And a lot of it really led me back to the family.
I think it's important you had this passion and heart to help people at an early age.
I'm going to attribute the heart part to my mom. So this goes back to the family. It's I have a heart and I have a head, and a lot of the work that we do is a little bit of both the heart and the head. And my mom was the compassionate one. She just had the big heart and really just cared and put herself actually a lot into us as a mom. My dad was the thinker. He was the businessman, and it was about the numbers. And it's interesting how both of them actually continue to show up in my work and who I am to this day.
And that's why it's so important for other children to experience a wonderful childhood like you. We know you work with families and sometimes children who don't necessarily have a nice background. They're affected by child abuse and neglect. So what are some of the effects of child abuse and neglect?
So one of the things that happens is, we'll focus on the child for a moment. There's the immediate act, right? There's either emotional, physical, or sexual abuse. It's a horrific incident that happens, but it doesn't stop then. What happens is that toxic stress develops like these basically biochemicals in the brain that change the wiring of the brain of the kid, so that the brain is hard to change once it's been wired in a certain way. But we see that in other ways. We see that in terms of behaviors, we see that in how those kids actually feel inside of them. So one of the things that happens is that you might notice anxiety or depression. A kid might be withdrawn, or they might be actually like very reactive, that if you try to discipline them, they kind of almost go berserk on you. It's a very strong reactivity. They're like, that's not normal for the situation. But then what happens is, as a kid then ages, in adolescence, they begin to act those behaviors out, and sometimes in different ways. Not always, but a lot of times. So it could be increased drug use, it could be increased alcohol use, it could be smoking, just to get rid of or distract from those really uncomfortable feelings that come from the original trauma. Then what happens is that now you have a lifetime of habits of overeating or drinking or smoking, and now you have some serious health issues when you're more my age. So it affects a lot for that individual. For you and me, what that means is that if a kid has that abuse or neglect, they're more likely to have education problems, which might lead to special education, which is expensive. They may have mental health problems that get pretty severe. That gets very expensive. Heart disease, those kinds of health things. So what happens is that you and I are paying for it financially on one level, but we're also interacting with those folks who are adults who have that kind of trauma in their background, and it's still showing up in their lives today.
Mm-hmm. I think the work you guys are doing is so important. It's vital to our community. We encourage people to get involved with Prevent Child Abuse North Carolina, because they really are fighting to end this problem, which is very, very preventable. Very, very preventable.
That's the real good news that we have at this point in terms of what we know about child abuse and neglect, and that it is preventable. So if we had gone back a few years ago, 10 or 20 years ago, and you'd really ask me, do we really know what can impact this issue? I'd have to say no. It's like we have some ideas, but we really don't know what the answers are. We have identified in North Carolina some of the best evidence-based programs in the country. And the good news is actually North Carolina is on the cutting edge. We have some fantastic partners. So we will never claim success only by ourselves. We work a lot with our partner organizations. Department of Public Health, Department of Social Services, the Duke Endowment, very progressive thinking organizations that we work with and through are actually investing in some of these like very effective programs. So what we've really found is that there's a handful of evidence-based parenting programs that have been tested for years and keep showing good results. And one of our jobs is what we're supposed to be doing is making sure that we can get it out of the ivory tower and get it into the real world. We want to make sure it works in Camden County. We want to make sure it works in Mecklenburg. We want to make sure that every corner of the state has one of these programs so parents have resources. But I want to make sure that it really works when it's in Camden or when it's in Bertie.
And I'm glad our state is on the cutting edge of these programs and this research, setting a standard and role model for other communities, other states to follow, because child abuse and neglect touches not only North Carolina, but communities across our country, around the globe.
It is, and one of the fascinating things about North Carolina is that we were on the kind of the front edge of this idea of like, let's do evidence-based programs. Like the people always have wanted, once we kind of figured out what abuse and neglect was, it's like we want to stop it. But people usually want to stop it in terms of it's a specific case, and they want to kind of focus on that specific case instead of like, no, we can really help all parents be better. We can help all kids thrive and all. So one of the things we've really done well in North Carolina is the first wave is using these evidence-based programs. The second wave that we're really on the front edge of the country is we're helping to make sure that those programs maintain what we call fidelity to the original program, that the people who are implementing them in the different counties are implementing them well so that they actually work in those counties as well. My background is having done some of those programs is once you get one of the programs and you read the manual, like, I don't really like page 17. I've got a better idea. But what you really have to do is you have to kind of say, we need to follow how this has been done because you know what, other people have been looking at this for 10, 20 years.
Very interesting stuff. Let's talk about toxic stress. Now, isn't some stress good for a child?
It is, and and I think that's one of the things. There's actually a couple of different kinds of stress that we need to think about. So all of us experience challenges during the day. So those are stressful, right? And those are learning experiences, particularly for kids. In fact, actually, any new activity is always going to be a little bit stressful, particularly to a kid. That's healthy. Now there's another kind of level that's more, I want to call moderate level of stress. This is where it's like, it's a more intense stress, but it kind of depends on the kid's life situation of how many other resiliency factors, protective factors are there compared to the stressor. So you might have like a great extended family. You got grandma, you got uncles. You can turn to your uncle and talk to that uncle about what's going on, right? That's helping you deal with that more intense stress. You have to kind of balance that out. But maybe another family doesn't. That kid's isolated. The toxic stress is now you're actually into abuse and neglect. And this is actually traumatizing. And it's so traumatizing, what happens is the brain is releasing different chemicals that changes how the brain forms and creates certain pathways for a kid to experience and almost like re-experience those things as they move on in life. So the toxic stress is really interesting. It's current science, it's the neuroscientists, and they get to look inside of your brain with these interesting MRIs and all, and really seeing how trauma from abuse and neglect affects the brain, not just short term, but long term.
Very, very interesting. I think it's wonderful you guys research all this stuff and all these programs you have to really bring sensibility to these issues.
That's my dad and me.
Right?
That goes back to the analytical side of my mom's the one who's saying we've got to do something, right? We got to care for these kids. My dad's the one in me who's saying, okay, does it work? How do we do this? How do we do this the most effectively? I'm a taxpayer. Is it a good use of my money? That's the banker, right? You can hear the banker coming through.
That's true. Well, that's being sensible too.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how the effects, or how can we stop the damage from the toxic environment?
So the best thing to do is prevent it, right, before it ever happens. Because once it happens, then you're playing a catch-up game. It's kind of actually like if you think of a house as a foundation. If you have cracks in your foundation, it's really hard to get that ever right, and it's really expensive to fix a foundation of a house, and it's always kind of crooked, and what happens from there. So is it, can kids heal? Can they get better? Yes, but that's really expensive. It's actually probably more cost effective to prevent it from ever happening in the first hand. And the best place to do that is actually through the parents And we think one of the best ways is to make sure that the parents have the resources and supports that they need to be the best parent that they can be. I've worked with parents from housing projects to middle-class families, and what I've discovered is that almost all of them with a handful of exceptions, it's very rare, they want to be the best parent they can be because they want their kid to thrive and take off. And because of that, that's a great motivator for a kid to actually, or for a parent, or for us to do things. But we think that, and the research bears this out, parents are arguably the most influential part of a kid's life in terms of how they turn out to be. So now it's time for the rest of us to make sure that we're supporting that parent so that they have the skills to be a good parent, that they have the social support. Those kinds of things are keyed in terms of what happens for a parent. And I'll give you an example. I mean, sometimes what will happen is that things are going well for me and my children. Something happens, and I'm like, I don't know how to deal with this. Sometimes it helps just to have, like, particularly me, another guy. It's like, okay, what are your daughters doing? You know, they're friends and all. Sometimes we just need that support, and sometimes, a lot of times it's like, yeah, you know what, I had no idea I was dealing with the exact same issue. Other times it may be that a parent really doesn't know a particular thing, or when a kid kind of transitions, say, from elementary school into the adolescence age, changes happen. You're like, ooh, I knew exactly what to do with my daughter when she was cute, and now all of a sudden I've got this teenage monster on my hand. What do I do with that? And it parents have to keep learning, as we keep going through our lives.
All right, and the same parenting skills that our parents use may not work on kids today, or do they?
You know what? I think the ones that worked. And I think the ones that didn't. I mean, still don't. So what we're finding, and the wonderful thing actually about science is that we're past the kind of the anecdotal kind of thing where, like, my parent says, well, it worked for me, it'll work for you. Well, we can both see how that works in our own lives, but we can also kind of go back to, like, researchers and be like, well, on average, what really works the best and all. What I have found, and this is a great story, is that I was talking to a mom who went through one of the programs that we support across the state. And she said, you know what, I have never in my life seen good parenting. I was parented badly. My family, honestly, raises their kids. They don't do a good job. So I knew I could do better, but I didn't know where to go. And so people were saying this is the way to do it. And she was like, it's not working, right? Your kids are having problems. It's not working. And so when she took this course, she said, this is the first time that I've actually, like, had someone in any kind of way help me figure out how to be the parent that I always knew I could be. And she said she's still getting pressure from some of those family members actually to go back to the other ways. And she was funny. She was like, no, you watch. In about 3 years, they're all going to be coming to me because my kid is going to be thriving in school. And they're going to be like, what are you doing? I mean, something's going on there that's different than in my family.
Parenting is a learning curve, and that we need resources and tools out there to help people become the best mothers and fathers they can be.
Absolutely.
They can be.
Yep.
Time is really flying. We got about, I guess, 1 or 2 minutes left in this segment. And how can people find out about the programs here at Prevent Child Abuse North Carolina and some of the programs we talked about on the show today?
Sure. So one of the things you can actually do is come to our website. We have information about all the different programs we're doing. You can see, like, outcomes, that we're really getting real-world outcomes in North Carolina. Those are great ways to find out what's happening. And then you can find out, like, what's happening in your counties, of what's happening in your specific community that you can actually do as well, too. Probably the easiest way is right through our website.
Okay, we encourage people to go to the website. Bud, appreciate you. We can come back and talk more about early intervention programs with Cindy Ehlers from East Carolina. Stay with us.